Hello, Keith Rucker here at VintageMachinery.org. I'm up in Belvedere, Tennessee today, and we're going to do a little shop tour with a gentleman that I've recently made acquaintance with. Actually been corresponding with him for many years, but actually first got a chance to visit him face to face earlier this year and wanted to come back and do this video. But this is Walter Clements, and he is a retired engineering professor, correct?
That's right.
Worked at Auburn University.
And Clemson.
And Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess this has been your retirement dream here, probably even before retirement, huh?
I would say so, yes, all along.
So how did you get into restoring machinery and collecting this stuff? When did that all start?
A long time ago. My dad ran he didn't actually own the shop, but he managed a shop in South Carolina. And I just kind of grew up with it. Didn't serve an apprenticeship formally, but I did get an apprenticeship and got a degree in engineering, and then started teaching at Auburn and taught drawing, but they found out I had machine shop experience, and pretty soon I was teaching in the shops there. And then I had a home shop, and to keep things repaired, I started buying some old tools. And about that time, the shop that Dad managed was closing. Some of it, my grandfather bought the lathe, which you'll see in here, and the drill press he bought new in 1919.
Wow.
So it's been in the family for a while. And just kind of grew from there, and I moved up here to try to simplify my life, but I haven't.
I'll tell you what, let's go inside and
all right,
see what you got. So tell me a little bit about the shop itself. You built this here, didn't you?
The shop, another gentleman, a local man, built it for me. I was his helper. And I would point out that my Dad's family were mechanically oriented all way back, apparently. And there's a picture on the wall, not a very good one, of a shop they had up in above Spartanburg, South Carolina. And it's practically the same building.
Okay.
That shop is long gone. And in 1917, Granddad moved to Spartanburg. His wife wanted the kids to get a good education, which they did. And at that time, he bought the lathe back here and set up a shop in Spartanburg. He was not a very good businessman, apparently, and sold out that shop to a man who was getting into the automobile parts business and needed an automobile parts shop. And it grew from that and lasted into the 1970s when everybody got old and retired. And after they had a lot of newer equipment, but after the shop sold, all of the new equipment went very quickly. And what was left is the nucleus of this shop.
Okay.
So some of it we can trace back to up above Spartanburg in the 1880s, and most of it is more like the 1920s.
Okay, and this is a line shaft driven shop.
All of it's driven by one motor, 5 horsepower electric Westinghouse, 3-phase.
Okay.
And I think it's 1903. The Alabama Electric Motor Service rebuilt it, and they found some little, just little paper IDs where they'd written in inspections under the field coils. So they went, and they weren't exactly the same day. They were 2 or 3 days apart. And they were 1903.
Okay.
So
very interesting.
This is the power system for the line shaft, and also it generates the converter here generates the 3-phase power that runs the lathe, the big south bend. But most of it goes to this 5 horsepower motor, which I think we determined earlier was a 1903 model. There's the converter. And here's the Frankenstein switch. Okay. This is a 30-inch swing, 14-foot bed metal lathe made by the Shepard, Lathe, and Morse. And it took me a long time to figure that out because it was built in 1858, that's documented. And sometime after that, it was rebuilt, and they called it the house lathe. It was in one of the mills up in the Carolinas. But Mr. House was the master mechanic, and he adapted it, he rebuilt it in the 1880s. So that kind of mixed up some features, and I couldn't figure it out. But the giveaway is the thrust bearing on the end.
Okay.
And finally, in one of those clouds of inspiration, I found one just like it, and it's very definitely Shepard, Lathe, and Morse. Made in Worcester, Mass, and we've had it well over 40 years, so it's been around. But I kind of think Worcester was the home of machine tools for America. Certainly a lot of them were made there. And I've seen several lathes that had an almost identical tailstock. So when you try to identify something, you see that tailstock, and I finally concluded that of the 4 or 5 major manufacturers of lathes, metal lathes in Worcester, all of them made the lathe, but they went around the corner to the tailstock store and bought the same tailstock or similar. It's things like that can frustrate somebody trying to identify a machine. But
so
1858.
Wow.
Yeah, Shepard, Lathe, and Morse.
It's got to be one of the oldest wood or metal lathes
Metal,
around.
yeah.
If you really stop and think about it, there's probably not too many out there that predate this one.
Right.
That's pretty amazing.
You have to be a bit of a horse to get it going. But
Which I guess with the diameter here, you know, it seems to me it's real low to the ground, but I guess with the size, it's probably, this is about the height.
I get some complaints about that from some friends, yes, but it's very handy for working with this.
Absolutely.
And I do have some 2x under there, and I even considered bringing it up a little bit. All right, this will shift the belt from the loose pulley to the tight.
So this lathe here, you say was your father's lathe? Or
Well, yes, but my grandfather
before that?
bought it in 1919, and it was brand new. And it's a 15-inch by 6-foot south bend.
Wow.
And this is the original 3-phase arrangement, and I think that we're safe in saying that's the original switch. I use old machines to restore old machines. I have a number of friends who are involved in restoration of tractors and such as that, and this has been a workhorse. And down the road is the Big Falls Mill, a water-powered grist mill, and they had textile machinery, so every so often I get something from them.
Sure.
Not only, it started as a textile mill, and John Lovett and his wife owned it and have been restoring the textile part of it, but they've used it as a working grist mill. So eventually he hopes to go back to having the carding machines, which are now running, and some of the other looms, etc.
Wow.
running off of them. And they're a good customer. Now, I don't charge them, but they feed me occasionally and are nice to me.
Yeah.
But this is the workhorse.
This is the workhorse. It looks like it's in its original. You haven't restored this. This is.
It's unrestored.
Yeah,
right.
But it's actually in remarkable condition. I mean, the paint's still. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's in good shape.
My dad would tell you they did an awful lot of small armatures for automobiles and that kind of thing. Now they did other bigger jobs, but he says when the carriage is getting down here, begin to kick this in. For every inch you travel, give it about 1/1000th, and to make up for the wear there.
To make a little wear, yeah. So. A lot of these older south bends, I guess the ways were not hardened, so they unfortunately some of these south bends have a little bit more wear in them. Some of the south bends did have hardened lathes, but I'm guessing but I'm guessing this one didn't.
I don't think this has back that far. It's running in back gear. There are 2 of these pulleys in there actually for a job for a friend, and I've already drilled it. I've got to bore it out and ream it to one inch, and that's the feed, which is very slow at the moment,
slow, right?
but it's in back gear.
So you can see the hand wheel moving now.
Very slowly once the slack takens up.
Very nice.
right, this is a high precision lathe that gets a fair amount of use. It's a Rivet 608. It's actually a few months older than I am. It was made in 1935, so that gives you a little hint there. They enjoy quite a following. Very well made, very well finished. Just a beautiful machine. And had an old friend who had it, and it was missing a few pieces, but we've been able to get it back together, everything since then, that time, since I got it from Henry. It takes a 5C collet, and I've got a 4-jaw chuck with it, and the usual this is I think the taper, the original taper on these is a Jarno taper. I see a lot of questions about it, but it's either a Jarno taper or very close to it. However, finally just made a new ram and reamed it for number 2 Morse, which makes it a lot easier to get parts for. But kept the old ram just in case. But just a fine machine. It does have the quick change, but it's not like anybody else's quick change. You need the manual to do this. And it has the motor underneath. There were various configurations, but Rivet was very proud of their product. And in their old catalog that predated this, but it was significant about their attitude that our lathes are not made for amateurs, and we prefer people of this class to buy something else and not use our lathes, because in damaging the machine, they will damage our reputation. I keep that in mind every time I use this. It's not made for amateurs, so I'm very careful, and I've had no real problem with it. This is a 36-inch SC Forsyth bandsaw, probably made in the 1870s. And I know it's out of place in a wood shop, but it does come in handy. And back in the 70s, a friend of mine at Auburn, from Auburn, had it, and he had purchased it from a funeral home. They made their own caskets. And this was in Oklahoma. His job changed, he transferred, and he told me if I would go get this, I could have it. Wow. Well, a couple of years passed, and I didn't get out there, and the bicentennial was cranking up in Washington. The Smithsonian wanted to replicate their display of 1876, and they needed a bandsaw, and a mutual friend who did restoration knew that I had this one, and he arranged for them to pick it up and restore it, and they would keep it 2 years and then return it to me, which at the end of 2 years, they wanted to continue that display, so they did, and we agreed on, and it stayed there about 20 years. Wow. Yeah. But the restoration is the Smithsonian's restoration. Now, Bob and I did the woodwork on the rims of the wheels and the table, but the paint, that's their striping, and wow. I thought it was just beautiful, still do, and it's useful.
This is an absolutely beautiful machine, and all the details on here is just amazing.
Your 15-inch Lodge & Davis shaper, probably from the late 1880s, early 90s, just because of the name on it. The company changed names, and I honestly don't use it very often. Well, I don't use much of anything very often these days, but it is in working shape, and I have used it. So,
where did you acquire that one from?
Sort of a trade-off with some people in Mississippi. Okay. And it eventually is going back to Sioux Lathe. It was given to them, the Lathe Museum. I had a newer one that was typical to what they had, so we just swapped.
Okay.
But now I'm about ready to let them have it back. And they want it back, which is all right. But it came out of a small machine shop in, I believe, Columbus, Mississippi, and was in use into the 1960s. This is a 6-inch Pratt Whitney shaper. We think it's about 1878. There are several features about it that those who know about these things can tell, like this vertical plate that you can mount things to. The first design did not have that, but pretty soon they came out. And this is the original vise. It's hand cranked, so we're off the grid, and it's set for a very fine cut at the moment.
Yeah, it's actually cutting.
It's cutting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it does have a cone pulley for line shaft drive, the mating pulleys down there.
So we'll run off of either hand-powered or
Hand-powered.
or flat belt. Wow.
But to me, and the color, the paint is, mostly the paint is original. It's been very well maintained. It has seen some use, but there's no appreciable wear. And I mentioned this planer, shaper is not mine, really. And when it goes out, this one is going over. Okay. And it's going to get belted to the,
so you can run it off
counter shaft.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually like a shaper. They're very handy for a lot of small jobs.
Absolutely. And you can do a lot of work on a shaper. It's amazing what you can do on one.
Getting ready to make some T-bolts for the planer and some other use, things like that.
So where did you get this one from?
Well, it was on eBay. And I have a friend over in Tony. It actually belongs to him. And he has a collection of foot and hand power machinery. Okay. Ray Ferguson.
I got you.
You need to get in touch with Ray. But I told him about it. It was 4 hours. He hadn't seen it, which is odd, but he bought it. And a few days or a few weeks later, he got another shaper that he'd been after for some time. And then shortly after that, one of our mutual friends donated a planer, and he bought a big bulleted vertical lathe at the same time.
I got you. And
he called and said, "Wouldn't you like to have the shaper? Just take it and keep it as long as you want to." He knows how old I am, so he at any rate, I've enjoyed it. And
so we've been talking about metal shapers, and I guess the cousin or maybe the daddy to a metal shaper is a metal planer.
Right.
And that's what you got here.
That's what I have here. It replaced a very early planer that Dad had acquired, and that planer is now at the Tannehill State Park in Alabama in their machinery building. But a friend gave me this planer, and I would mention that my dad thought if you don't have a planer in your shop, you don't really have a machine shop. You've got to have a planer. It's the only way to accurately generate a flat plane surface. Milling machines, spring, and so forth. So the planer, there's no name on it who made it. And I looked through old catalogs and Cope's book, nothing quite like it. And the friend, Troy Beatty had it. He said that he was told it was made in the Georgia Tech shops during World War II. And I thought, well, they certainly used an archaic design. And finally I got on the computer, I can do that, and found an ASME publication on the paper on the Georgia Tech Engineering School. It was one of the first in the South. And in there, they showed scenes in the laboratories, the drafting lab, the woodworking shop, the pattern shop, the foundry, machine shop, and there was the picture. It all came to, this is the article, and
Yeah,
they're
get some good
working
close
on
up of that,
they're
yeah.
working on it right there, and there's no mistaking that. It's got a peculiar mechanism here that nobody else had. So it was actually built in the Georgia Tech shops, and they kept it into the 1950s when the great wave of modernization came through. And
So you think it was actually built by Georgia Tech in their shop?
right, we know it was.
Wow.
They say it was here, and they've got the
Okay.
pictures of it, so there
Okay,
you go.
Yeah, wow, that's pretty impressive. So as a engineering student around the turn of the century, maybe a little before or
Right.
after, as a project, the class got together and they designed and built a metal planer. in
That's
their
right.
shops. That's engineering right there, guys.
And most engineering schools had shop courses. You took drawing, pattern making,
Right.
machine shop, all of that into the 60s and 70s, but it was beginning to phase out.
Right.
So they had the foundry, and there's several indications on here. They made their own patterns, and at first I thought there was a big crack, and then I realized in the bed, and then I realized they had to make 2 pores to get the bed because it was such a big casting for a shop like that.
Sure.
But the point I liked about it, it does say that our schools, our technical schools, engineering schools, the engineers were expected to know how to make things that worked, to make the drawings and all of the manufacturing processes.
Wow. So if anybody's at Georgia Tech, see if you can dig up the drawings on this.
Right. They may exist.
Who knows? They're maybe tucked away in some archive. That's pretty amazing.
And it does very good work, and unlike so many planers, there's practically no wear on it. You can look at bushings. There are no marks on the table. That's unusual.
It's in pristine condition.
Yes.
There's no doubt about it.
I've got a piece of junk in it to show it working, but yes.
Very neat.
1906,
1906.
1905, 1906.
Wow.
Someday I'm going to put a guard over that gear.
So a lot of people call these a camelback drill. press.
Camelback drill. I'd never heard that term until fairly recent times, but it's 21-inch champion, made in 1919 for the U.S. government, but they never used it. My granddad bought it brand new, or unused.
So that would have been
About
World War I. I
Right,
guess
right.
they fought for the war effort. But,
Same time as the lathe.
okay.
And Neil Tyson found the information on them,
Oh, really?
the date, I believe it's on the wall up
Okay,
there.
so yeah,
That somewhat faded piece of paper.
But so this is another one that's a family piece.
Right. And it gets a good bit of use. There's several people around that have bigger things that needed to be drilled.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's shops around with equipment that can surpass this, but
Right.
they aren't open to just
Doing a
in and
one-to-one
everybody.
thing.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
It's on auto power feed, hand feed. Or if you want a quick feed, this is a #1 Fox milling machine, And it's a 1905. Now my dad had a old Pratt Whitney in their shop, and I had it. It was about the same age as the shaper we were looking at, but somehow I got talked out of it years ago. And when I moved up here, Neil Tyson, who we both know, had bought a Fox mill out of a shop in South Alabama, and it was a wreck. So he found this one, and it had it shipped from Washington State. And then a few weeks after he found this one and had it shipped in to his place over near Tony, Alabama, he found I believe it's a Cincinnati mill just up the road. Now, if he hadn't brought this one in, he'd never found the other one. Anyhow, he gave me this, and I've been very grateful. It's very handy. We've actually cut gears on it. There's a Burke dividing head. It's in very good condition. It's well made. It's not the best known make of a milling machine, but certainly a well made one. Not much wear on it. So, and I guess other than the lathe, this probably gets the most use of anything I have. There's a local shop, auto parts place, and every so often I have to cut a keyway, Woodruff key. Got a whole set of them back in this cabinet. So that and other little keyways, that kind of thing. But we have cut gears. Rather a slow feed, but it's working.
Tell them about the shaft mice here.
Basically, they're leather rings that travel back and forth and just keep the dust off the shaft, polish it.
They're called shaft mice?
Shaft mice. I've heard them called chasers and several other things, but I like the shaft mice.
All right. Well, Walter, I appreciate you taking time today to show us around your shop. This is really an impressive setup you got here. Quite a collection.
It's quite a collection, and it's fun to work with. This is where I live. I go to the house to eat and sleep, and that's about it.
I can understand that.
Yeah, the shop has level floors. There's not a level floor in the house either. The shop was built by a fine man, craftsman. But I've enjoyed it and enjoyed having you. And any visitors are always welcome.
Great.
Most of them.
Most of them. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll be a wrap. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Okay.
That's good.